Hello, welcome to the Abbots address. Um, so today is, we're in May. I don't know, I forget the date. I always do. But actually, that's not true. I don't know it, so I can't forget it. But anyway, there's deep, deep unrest in society right now, and a lot of, unrest in just in our world, And so I've been trying to put some kind of thoughts together, some kind of a meaningful response. And, my first response is I'm not the right package to be responding as a white guy. One of the things that I noticed right away is that my feed blew up with a bunch of white people explaining what everyone should do and how everyone should think. And honestly, I don't want to be another one of those people. I really don't. I feel that this is an important time for people of color to have the space and to take lead and to be listened to. So my initial response really has been just to listen and to not try to be the white person who knows all the answers, because I don't. I honestly don't. And so I've been listening and I've been reflecting and. Fortunately, this whole reality of racism is not new to me. I do bring the perspective of a historian to it. It turns out to be the case that in my academic life, I teach a whole semester thing about racism in America in the 20th century. So I've studied this academically. I have in fact encountered the reality that I'm a white guy. like there was a time when I didn't realize that, when I thought that I was just a person and that other people had special labels, but I was just a person, and it turns out not to be the case. So I mean, there's a lot of things I could say about it. And I've been asked to, a lot of Sangha have been reaching out. When are you going to make a statement? When are you going to say something? What are you going to express? So I'm going to try. The first thing that happened was when Ango finished, I just went into a deep coma of non-doing. The Ango was an extremely heavy lift for me and for Doan and for all temple leadership. But, we just made it to that Ango closing ceremony, and man, I just hit the deck face down, and I slept for, I don't know, seems like a couple lifetimes. And feeling like, we really did a great job getting the Sangha through this COVID-19 pandemic influenced, actually capsized our Ango, and we had to reconfigure. And so it's kind of, in the wake of kind of emerging from that and then facing this ongoing situation with the social unrest. So it's very troubling, One thing to say is that the Buddha himself was very much vocally and socially opposed to the caste system, which was the socially organizational structure of his day. So right from the very beginning of the Buddhist Sangha, it's not black versus white in capitalistic American society. It's, in that case, it's Brahminic culture and the indigenous Indic people and the Indo-Aryans and all this kind of stuff. And again, it wound itself around skin color. There are darker and lighter shadings. It wound itself around education. Only the Brahmins had access to a higher level of education. These trends happen, sadly, over and over. But the Buddha's stance was very clear. When you joined the Sangha, the community of practitioners, you stepped away from the caste system. It didn't matter if you were a Brahmin or if you were a pariah, which is the highest or the lowest. In fact, when you entered the Sangha, you are no caste. Now you're just a member of the Sangha. And that was extremely countercultural. In fact, it even went so far as to admit for women, another radical countercultural move from the day. And since then, it would not be fair to say that Buddhism has constantly been on the vanguard of social interruption. I mean, it's been around for thousands of years in multiple cultures. And one thing that is completely common is that in every one of these cultures, there's always stress and there's tensions, and frankly, political systems and organizations of state, nation, and empire, they come and they go, honestly, from the longer perspective. The Song dynasty came and went. The Tang dynasty came and went. The Kamakura era in Japan ended. The Meiji era began and concluded. I mean, it just keeps going like that. And so what you find is there are various times when practitioners of the Dharma are like very actively engaged with that kind of stuff, or very actively not engaged. And it's very difficult to see what's going on until you realize that the most important thing is the transmission of the Dharma, the coming to awakening, right, of the individual person and the community of practitioners that the Dharma transmits. And then there are some times when the most appropriate move is to be quiet, go into the mountains and the caves and practice in isolation. And there are other times when the most appropriate move is to have tea with the emperor and influence as much as possible. And there's other times when the move is to be loud and proud about not agreeing with what's going on. And so there's a wide range, actually, of responses. So all of that is to say that, the Zen tradition writ large doesn't have just one response to things. It always is dependent on time, position, place, degree, right? Karma, situation, all of that stuff. So it seems to me that we're in one of those times. If we flip back to American culture, where I am right now, and most of the Sangha that I serve is, though not all, clearly institutional racism is a reality in our lives. Anyone who doesn't agree must not understand what it is. And that's a whole encounter. If there's anybody, and I don't know if it's the case, but if there's anybody that hasn't really encountered the fact, that really doesn't believe that racism is a real thing anymore, there's some education to be had there. There's a deeper look to be seen, to be engaged with. And the first thing is to simply realize, like, just for myself, when I grew up in a very safe neighborhood with very loving parents, in an environment where a policeman was always your friend and someone you turn to when needed. And without fail, that's how it's been, see. And that right there is a kind of privilege, definitely a privilege. And there's other folks for whom that's not true, that would not be a true statement. And the fact that that's not a true statement means there's a lot of resistance and difficulty that those folks have to push through that I didn't. Now, that can happen all kinds of ways. It happens to everybody in different degrees. That's clearly true. And we can say that there are some segments of society for whom it's way more prevalent than for others. See? And this is the case. I feel very strongly that it's self-evident that that's the case. Now, what to do about it? Well, I think one of the things to realize, from my perspective, is that history, so far, I can't be as completely optimistic as I like to be in light of recent events, our recent move towards tribalism and nationalism and shutting gates and everything is concerning to me. But writ large, you can say that if you look at 50-year clicks, things are improving radically, definitely. We've gone from, absolute slavery and ownership of other people to that being illegal, to on and on and on, to the civil rights movement and so on. And each one of these steps it does something to move the ball down the court, And my perspective is that what happens is there's a fatigue that happens, and people are kind of like done, you know, like a generation of folks, and they kind of tap out and make do. And then the next generation comes along or two, and they say, hey, this isn't good enough, and it moves further down the court, see. So if we flip and talk about, say, women's rights, so suffrage, right? So there was a whole bunch of folks about 100 years ago who really put their lives and families and everything on the line to give women the ability to vote, see. And before that day, they didn't have it. And after their efforts, they do, see. And they had to do all kinds of stuff, you know. They got in league with prohibition. They had a pandemic on their heels also. The World War I was running around. I mean, all this stuff. And in the midst of it, women's right to vote was secured. Now, for those ladies, that was a major success. It was a major movement forward. They were well pleased, and they took the rest of the day off. Okay, they did it. Good. Their daughters, their granddaughters, well, it's nice that we can vote, but what about this? See? And then their daughters, well, that's good, but what about this? You see, and it keeps moving inevitably, I think, and predictably towards equality and opportunity and justice. I think there is an arc this way, and it becomes particularly obvious, like I say, if you look at it historically from a wider angle than the news cycle of 24 hours or 1 hour news cycle. And so in my view, I think it's inevitable that there'll be social unrest because there's inequity, there's inequality, and it's real, and there's a new generation coming around, and I'm very not really surprised at all. I'm disoriented by the fact that this pandemic is happening, right? So when I think about going out and making a big public statement and protests and kind of a show of solidarity and stuff, I can't shake off the fact that this pandemic is a real thing. That's very kind of disorienting to me, but that's another layer. Writ large, engagement is necessary and important. Now, how we engage can look lots of different ways, For some people, just engaging with the fact that they're white for the first time actually is progress, I mean, maybe it's because I'm a jazz musician. I got a smack upside the head a long time ago around this stuff, Anyway, there we are. For others, holding it in the intention of one's practice, realizing that there is suffering and realizing that these sufferings are real, they're true, and that they have causes, right? This should sound familiar. This should sound noble truth familiar, right? And that those causes can be known. And then when we realize the causes of these sufferings, then we can address them, right? So there are things that we can do to continually improve the society that we live in. And this is for everybody's sake. It's not just for the minority of the moment. It's for all of us. As long as any one person, one sentient being suffers, then so do I. That's at the very heart of the Mahayana view and the Mahayana way of life, really. So it can look like a matter of self-exploration and education, if that's new to you and if that applies to you. I mean, that itself can be a radical experience. There are some fantastic books and articles and, a lot of resources for this if it's new to you. White Fragility is an excellent book, why it's so difficult for white people to even talk about race. There's a lot of good resources. You don't need me to tell them to you, hopefully. Then there's actively holding that in the intentions of your practice. We do a ton of liturgical stuff at the Buddhist Temple of Toledo, and it's real and it matters. And so this is another way of being very clear, you know, of actually engaging, holding it in your hearts, but actually doing the ritual stuff that we know how to do to bring that to life in your day. And then there's, you know, actually going out and being a part of some kind of a movement or some kind of a demonstration. And again, just to go back to something I opened with, my hope, my intention is to listen, not to be another white guy explaining everything, which I do. But in this case, I very much look for people of color to take leadership, and I'm very happy to listen to what they have to say and to learn and to try to understand and contribute in some way that's meaningful in their view, not just my view. Because the bottom line is, as much as I think I know, I can't possibly know what it actually is to grow up as a black man in this country. It's beyond my ability to experience it. I need to be humble before that fact and respect it, right? So then we can actually start getting engaged in ways that we feel are meaningful, that would be helpful. Now here there is some guidelines that the tradition holds. Remember the pure precepts of doing no harm, okay? Practicing the Dharma and actualizing good for others. So it's very common for folks who are deeply motivated to actualize good for others to kind of skip over the first one and maybe kind of rush into the doing. And there's a challenge there, and it doesn't really matter the cause, honestly. It can be gender equality, it can be sexual orientation issues, it can be environmental concerns, it can be, you know, pick your issue. There's a lot. Nuclear proliferation, technological disruption, on and on. In this case, racism. So it's quite possible to be so pulled by the injustice or the effort that you lose the first part, which is to not do harm. And unfortunately, I've known many activists that end up extremely bitter and very, very angry and a lot more suffering than when they began, even with all the efforts that they put in on behalf of a noble cause in their view, right? So there's something about how we engage that's absolutely important, right? And this first principle of how to engage is do no harm. And that means to yourself, right? And that also means to the people that you agree with. And that also means the people that you disagree with, right? So we have to expand our circle of concern to be everybody in this situation, all of us, right? So this requires kind of a superpower, right? A superpower of compassion, to be able to see that there is human suffering all the way around and to still be able to stand strong and to say what needs to be said and to be in the way that your intuition and heart tells you you need to be, right? How do you stand up or sit down? How do you speak or listen? How do you engage or hold noble silence in a way that honors the truth of not causing harm? See, this is a very important point. The last thing that I would want to do is, in a fit of noble enthusiasm, to go in and do something that actually caused more harm than good. Now, I'm not saying I don't do that sometimes, for God's sake, you know, I'm human too, but the intention is to not do that, right? So as much as possible, move in ways, engage in ways that actually continually alleviate harm and suffering rather than further it, right? And it takes a little bit of objectivity to be able to step back and see kind of three-dimensionally the situation as best you can to be able to understand. And sometimes it can seem just flat-ass hopeless, like there's just nothing that can be done. But actually, there are things that can be done, and every little thing really does matter. You know, there was an image when Fukushima happened, and there was this unrest, you know, this nuclear mistake There was another one that happened when the tsunami hit. I mean, on and on. You find situations where there's just unfathomable physical destruction. And then you can see people show up and just start gently engaging and helping and fixing just what they can. The simplest small act done with the eyes and heart of compassion compounds in the direction of alleviating suffering rather than the direction of causing it, furthering suffering, right? I'm not saying it means to always be meek all the time or to always be pacifist all the time, but it does mean to be wise all the time, right? So there's room for individual discernment and judgment about how to engage. That's the case. And to be able to see the humanity of everyone involved is absolutely necessary. Unfortunately, I've seen some dialogue, I'm sure everybody has, that reduces anyone of a different view to a demon, right? And that's one of the signs to be aware of in your own heart. If you go so far as to say anyone who is in law enforcement or obeys laws or thinks laws are a good idea is evil, or if you go so far as to think that every person who goes out to physically demonstrate with their body being present and witness that Black Lives Matter is automatically a brick-throwing looter, you've just collapsed unfairly. And that's a hideout. That's a cop-out. The reality is not quite so simple, right? So, end of the day, the temple leadership is working to craft some kind of a statement that'll be forthcoming. These are another white guy's ramblings, another white guy in a position of authority, and my plea really is for all of us to listen and to pay attention to what our hearts are saying and to engage in a way that doesn't cause harm, that aligns with practicing the Dharma and the Bodhisattva ideals of hearing the cries of the world and responding to the cries of the world in a way that doesn't cause harm. And ultimately, yes, as long as space and time exists, as long as beings continue to suffer from whatever cause in whatever form, may I be a refuge to them. May I be a doctor to their ills. May I be a strong hand to their wounded knee. May I be whatever it is that needs to show up. And so the question that no one can answer for you, no one can answer for me, is how will you show up? How will you respond to this situation? It matters a lot. Ultimately, I'm very optimistic. I feel it's a healthy thing. I feel it's time for society to confront and to evolve as we've done in the past and will continue to do. But I'm not going to just sit back and just be passive because I hope it'll go well. How will you show up? All right? That's what our practice is about. Take it up, everybody.